And good evening, Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Welcome to another episode of Steelers Friday Night Six Pack. I'm your host, as always, Tony Defio, and I thank you for joining me on this lovely, cool, crisp, or just cold, really, winter evening. And it's not winter yet; it's still fall, but it's December, so it might as well be winter. I mean, who are we kidding? You know, it's as soon as it changes to December, it's winter. Is it winter? I don't know. Anyway, I thank you for joining me. And before I continue, I would like to please ask you to subscribe and like our YouTube channel. We bring you live shows each and every day and night. We have this show. We have The Hangover. We have the Scobro Show. We have Know Your Enemy, Touchdown Under, previews, post-game show. We have everything you need. And we also are live on Facebook with all of those shows. And if you're on Facebook right now, you know that. And you're probably saying, hey, what's this guy's problem? He always comes on every Friday. That's because I'm live every Friday on the Friday Night Six Pack. And if you miss any of our shows live, you can always catch them after the fact in audio form. You can catch them on any audio platform of your choosing. I personally love iHeartRadio. We can catch them anywhere. Any place you listen to podcasts, you can find Behind the Steel Curtains podcast platform. Please check it out. You will not be sorry. And, of course, check out our audio-only shows, including From the Cutting Room Floor with Jeffrey Benedict, The Live Mic with Michael Beck, Let's Ride, the very popular Let's Ride with Jeff Hartman, the senior editor of Behind the Steel Curtain, Stat Geek, What You's Talking About, so much stuff, so much great stuff. The War Room with Matty Peverall and Chris Pugh. There's so many different people on our podcasting team right now, and it's growing each and every week. We're setting records. I'm very proud of our platform, and of course, there's many people that are to thank for that. Many people responsible for that. Jeff Hartman, Dave Schofield, Michael Beck, Shannon White, Jeffrey Benedict, so many people. The fellas from the mates from Australia, Matty Peverall, Mark Davidson, so many people. But the manager of the podcasting team is Brian Anthony Davis, and next time you see Brian, wish him a happy birthday. Friday's his birthday. He's celebrating along with Andy Grammer, who I think he's a very, very big Andy Grammer fan. Or maybe that's me. Anyway, Brian turns today, so whenever he's on next time, just wish him a happy birthday. He's a great guy. He works really hard for Behind the Steel Curtain, especially with the podcast. So it's a special day. So give him a shout out. And before I continue, I just wanted to check on the live chats. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's not true. I have more I want to say before I get to that. My script. So I have to write this stuff down. No. Please check out Behind the Steel Curtain, the website. We bring you news, commentary, film breakdown. Anytime there's any big news involving the Steelers, anytime there's a transaction, anytime there's a trade, which is the transaction, redundant. We're here to bring it to you. I think it's the greatest Steelers site on the internet, so please check it out. It's your one-stop shop for all your Steelers needs. Now, it's on to the live chat. Now, I didn't see this ahead of time. Who was the first one in? It was Kathy Ford. Kathy Ford. I mean, you talk about a legend. She was the first one in, and she says, hey, fam, hope Tony's as optimistic as Jeffrey was. Well, anyway, Brian Brown is here, Steeler Chick 46. George Teston, Steelers Pittsburgh. Brad Jewett. Buck Dancer. I love that name. Clarence Washington. And that's it for now. I think I got everybody. So thank you all for joining me on this, again, this BTSD. Brian. I have to pull this up. I almost introduced BTSD Steelers Radio, but that's Brian. He says, thanks, Tony. I think it's Brian. I think it's Brian, or maybe it's Dave. If it's Dave, that's weird. But it's probably Brian wishing, saying thanks for me wishing him a happy. That means he's watching. Now I'm nervous. Whew. I have to really put on a good show. But I've been in training all week for my new job, so I'm used to being judged. It's been a fun experience. So let's talk about last Sunday's game. I always like to start off with our sort of a review of the most recent Steelers game. And wow, what a game that was. It certainly went against everything I thought it would be. I thought the Steelers would win a ugly 20-10, 2016 kind of game. But it was ugly, all right. But the Bengals were looking pretty darn cute out there as they stomped all over the Steelers 41-10 at Paul Brown Stadium. And, I mean, it was never really a game. I mean, it was 7-0. The Bengals marched right down the field on the first drive, and Joe Burrow took it in himself to make it 7-0, and it was all Cincinnati from there. It was 24-3 before you knew it. It looked like the Steelers might get back in it before the half when Minka Fitzpatrick picked off a Joe Burrow pass as they were looking to score again. And one play later, Big Ben was picked off by guess who? Mike Hilton, who took it all the way for a touchdown. And it was 31-3, and it was game over. And the only question in the second half is, would Ben Roethlisberger exit the game early? And no, he didn't. By the way, I don't know what that is about Ben. He's left several games early during blowout wins, but I don't think he's ever left during a blowout loss. I don't know what that is, because I'd want to get out of there. If you're down, ultimately they were down 41-3 before they scored the garbage touchdown by Pat Freiermuth. Actually, it was a good play. I think he did a great job of keeping his feet in bounds and showing that great athleticism and potential that he's shown all season. But, I mean, it was the most anticlimactic touchdown there was. But Ben stayed in it the whole game. I don't know why, but at least he didn't get hurt. But moving forward, actually, no, I'm going to keep talking about last week's game. And I think the NFL has found the Steelers' weakness, and that's at least on defense, and that's trying to stop the run, and they haven't been able to do that for the past 3 games. And if you go back to the Seattle game, it's been a problem for going on 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks now, with the exception of Cleveland, and I don't know what's going on with them. The Steelers have not been able to stop the run for the longest time. There's no Tyson Alualu. There's no Stephon Tuitt. It's basically just Cam Hayward and really a bunch of backup players, because that's what the defensive line consists of. And the shame of that is, I think the line, or I thought that the defensive line was the team's biggest strength heading into the year, with obviously Hayward and Tuitt and Alualu having a change of heart and re-signing with them last spring. And you like that depth, or at least the potential. When you're talking about Isaiah Buggs and Carlos Davis, and of course nobody knew about Loudermilk back then, but he's shown some potential, and Henry Mondeau, and of course Chris Wormley is really, I always leave him out, but he's a solid veteran. He does a nice job, but really he's somebody who, in the perfect world, he should be their top backup, right? I mean, it should be Tuitt, Hayward, Alualu, and Chris Wormley as your top backup. He could play a little nose tackle, even though he's a little on the small side for that. And he could play defensive end, but he should not be starting really in an ideal world. And if he is starting in an ideal world, he's starting alongside Hayward and Tuitt, or Hayward and Alualu, or whatever, some combination. He should not be starting with Hayward and Isaiah Buggs or whoever. So it's been a real problem, and teams are just exploiting that week in and week out. And you combine that with all the other injuries. TJ Watt's been, for the numbers he's put up this year, and he's 12.5, 13 sacks now. I think he's still at 12.5. He's missed a couple of games with injury. He's now on the COVID list. So, they might not have him again this Sunday. Devin Bush has been MIA all year, really, even though he's only missed, one game with an injury. He's still not, whether it's the knee injury or not from last year, the ACL, he's not producing. Joe Schobert's been kind of just there, Hayden's out again. He's missed several games this year with an injury. So it's just been for as good as this defense is, as talented as it is, it's just been so depleted with injuries and compromised with, the COVID thing. And of course, lack of production. So, makes you wonder what the Ravens are going to be able to do this week, but I'll more on that later. But, as far as last Sunday's loss, 41-10 losses happen. They don't happen very often, ideally, if you're a decent team, but they do happen. The Steelers lost by 31 points 5 years ago against the Eagles. Carson Wentz, week 3, they had no answers for the Eagles in that game. And yet Pittsburgh, at the end of the year, they found themselves in the AFC Championship game. So, I mean, a 41-3 loss or 41-10 loss is not the end of the world in most cases. But when you combine that with everything else that's going on with the team, with all the injuries and the struggles with the offense, they're starting so many new guys. And again, I mean, big picture, I'm excited, obviously, about Najee Harris and Freiermuth and even the young linemen, Dan Moore and Kendrick Green, the rookies. And of course, you throw Kevin Dotson in there. I'm really excited about the potential of the line, the future of the line. It's just they're not ready yet. I think Dotson is their best lineman, but he missed last week and he's not going to be back for a while. So, when you view that 41-10 loss in that way, it's really discouraging because, it came on the heels of the heartbreaking loss to the Chargers on Sunday Night Football, a game that the Steelers were, again, dealing with a lot of injuries on defense specifically. Yet they found a way to battle back after being down by 17 points, and they just needed one stop on defense to win, and they couldn't do it. The week before that, Ben was out with the, he was on the COVID list. He missed that game. TJ Watt left in the second half with an injury, and it was a tie. So, when you lose the way they did this past Sunday, it makes you wonder, are things starting to implode for them? Because let's face it, we're all human beings, right? I don't care how good you are. I don't care how, you could talk about the standard being the standard. You can, use all these T-shirt sayings, but at the end of the day, we're all human and we're all susceptible to just saying, you know what, it's not our year. So you wonder if they have what it takes to rebound from this. And maybe they might have the right attitude, despite, some things that, Chase Claypool and the bad optics, if you will, with the saying that he wanted to have music at practice to make it more fun. Despite that, maybe they do have the right attitude, but maybe they just don't have the horses. Sometimes you don't have the people to do it. So I'm wondering about that. When you when you suffer two not defeats, but heartbreaking games back to back, and then it's followed up by just a thrashing by a team in the Bengals who you just owned for years. And of course, it doesn't matter now that they owned them for years, because the Bengals, I think, are a great young and talented team, and they might be the best team in the division. But you're kind of used to the Bengals being that team that was a get-right team, right? Okay, you're having problems. Well, they're playing the Bengals. They could kind of work through things and learn from things and learn some things while earning a W in the process. Well, it's not been that way anymore. It's clear that the Bengals are a better football team than the Steelers, not just because of last Sunday, but because of the last 3 times that they played. The Bengals have dominated them every single time. There's no other way to say it. It was more reflective in this most recent score, but if you remember Week 3 at Heinz Field, the Bengals just dominated from beginning to end. And same thing last December in Cincinnati. The score didn't reflect it. It was like 26-15 or whatever. It didn't seem like a dominant performance by the Bengals, but it really was if you watched the game. So it just makes you wonder where the Steelers are right now in the pecking order, of the AFC North. And there are a lot of people that spent a lot of emotional equity this past week talking about the Steeler way and the tradition and the pride. Guys like obviously Ryan Clark, the most vocal, saying nobody's afraid of them anymore. They're not physical. Arthur Moats got in on it, talking about Devin Bush specifically and the effort he's putting forth. According to the Moats and the film that he studied, the tape that he studied, Bush is not putting any effort. And it's one thing for people like me to say it, the fans. How can you quantify effort? But if you're an expert, if you're a former player, maybe you can look at it and say, I don't think this guy's putting in the effort. So Arthur Moats, of course, Rocky Blyer on his podcast, he put the team on blast. Who am I missing? There were more. Chris Hoke, critical of them. And a lot of these guys, when you're talking about Ryan Clark, when you're talking about Troy Polamalu, he didn't say anything, but people have been replaying his Hall of Fame speech and what it means to be a Steeler and the pride that you should take in that. And Chris Hoke was on Super Bowl winners. Ryan Clark, of course, was. Rocky Blyer, 4-time Super Bowl champ, Vietnam veterans. He knows what it takes to win and to be resilient. So these guys know what you're talking about. But the only problem with all that is, it's like I mentioned earlier in the show, maybe they just don't have it. It's great to say next man up and the standard is the standard. And people always say that. But if that were really true, if I always forget the guy's name, if Tunska can replace TJ Watt, or if Taco Charlton, who's a higher pedigree player, if he could replace TJ Watt, then TJ Watt would have no leverage in contract negotiations. So, the whole next man up and standard is standard, it's a great thing to say, but it's not realistic in the vast majority of the cases. So when you're dealing with all that they're dealing with, it's easy for these guys from the outside to say, "Oh, you're not physical enough. You're not taking things seriously. You don't care. You don't care about tradition, about the past." And yes, when people like Chase Claypool were saying, "Oh, they should play music at practice and make it more fun," that doesn't look good. But I'm pretty sure they're trying to rectify these things. I'm pretty sure Mike Tomlin is trying to fix these problems. He's one of the better coaches in the NFL for a reason. So and the Steelers themselves, they know what their standards are as an organization. Art II knows. Kevin Colbert knows. Obviously, Tomlin knows. They know. So they're not just half bleeping it throughout the week. They're trying to fix these problems. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of money involved. But it just doesn't seem like they have the horses to get it done. I remember when in the mid-'80s, I think it was 1985, Dwight White, the late, great Dwight White, member of the Steel Curtain defensive line from the 1970s, him saying that the defense was soft and cheesy. Well, yeah, it was soft and cheesy because you didn't have Jack Lambert and Mean Joe and Mel Blount out there. And you yourself, Dwight White, you didn't have those guys out there playing each and every week. You had, guys like Gary Dunn were okay. Keith Willis, I've always been a big fan. But you had, people like Lupe Sanchez and, players of that ilk back there. Rick Woods, he was a decent enough player, but he wasn't Mel Blount. He wasn't even Mike Wagner. So, it comes down, at the end of the day, it comes down to a lack of talent, in my opinion. When you're dealing with the Steelers' problems, or you're talking about their problems anyway, I should say, you're talking about a lack of personnel. It's like I always go back to Ray Gibson from the movie Life. Ain't nobody got no talent. That's what you're dealing with, a lack of talent. When Martin Lawrence's character was trying to coach up the prison baseball team, they didn't have any talent. That's why they couldn't win that roasted pig every year. So, not to mention a movie you probably thought I was ever gonna mention, but that's what it is. People keep talking about, the Steelers' depth. What's wrong with their depth? It's not what's wrong with their depth. It's what's wrong with their starters. And their starters are either injured or on the COVID list. So many of them anyway. That's what the issue is. It's not the depth. Everybody has, in today's NFL, has a questionable depth. That's just the way the NFL is now, with free agency and with the salary cap and these quarterbacks taking up so much of the cap space. It's hard to have quality depth at most positions. Maybe a few positions you might be able to have that, but most positions you're going to have a taco replacing a NFL Player of the Year candidate. That's just how it is. People talk about Taco Tuesday when I talk about Taco Charlton. It's probably best for the Steelers if the majority of his action takes place on a Tuesday in practice and not on Sunday afternoon in place of TJ Watt. That it's not good for business. So on that note, at the 22:42 mark, I will say goodbye to part 1 of tonight's show. If you're watching me live on YouTube or Facebook, don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. If you're listening to me on an audio platform, please download part 2. I thank you for downloading part 1, but please download part 2 of this episode of Steelers Friday Night 6-Pack. And welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of this episode of Steelers Friday Night 6-Pack. I'm your host, as always, Tony Defio. And I thank you for, if you listened to part 1 or watched it live, I thank you for that. If you're still with me live for part 2, or if you downloaded part 2 on an audio platform, I thank you for that. And before I continue, let's see who else we have here. We have Steelers Freak, Mark Tobin, Ryan G. Did I miss anybody? Brian Brown, Micah. All right. And speaking of Ryan G, and this kind of segues nicely into the second half of tonight's show. And he says about the 2022 Pittsburgh Steelers, looking forward to what they do with all this cap space. I think last time I checked, they're projected to have like $50 million in cap space next year. And we're going to talk about that a lot down the line. But that leads me to my next segment, my next subject. And that's, if you're already looking ahead to next year and what they're going to do with all that salary cap space, is there any reason to get excited about Ravens week? Because as you know, it's Ravens week. It used to mean so much for both of these teams. I'm sure in Baltimore they called it Steelers week, or they called it something else. But whenever the Steelers and the Ravens faced off in the past, it almost always meant something. Even last year, it meant something as the Steelers were starting off 11-0. They beat the Ravens twice and it helped them win the division. Of course, the Ravens made the playoffs, and they actually made it further in the playoffs. The point is, these two teams have always been strong contenders. Not always, but more often than not. And they're always battling for AFC North supremacy. So now they're facing off this week. The Ravens are 8-3. Pittsburgh is 5-1, 2.5 games behind with 6 to go. 3 years ago at this time, the roles were reversed. The Steelers, I think, were 7-2-1, I believe. And the Ravens were whatever they were, but they were 2.5 games back. And it looked like Pittsburgh had clear sailing for the division title and a playoff spot and who knows what else. And, of course, Pittsburgh collapsed. And the Ravens wound up winning the division and by a half a game. So can the Steelers kind of flip the script this time and trip the Ravens up and come from like a far behind to win the division? Obviously, if they win this Sunday, that would be a huge step in that direction. You know, they would be a game and a half back with 5 to go, which doesn't seem that bad. But the question is, as I alluded to in the first half of the show, do the Steelers have the manpower for that? Right now, it doesn't look like it to me. You know, as I'm doing this show, TJ Watt, his status for Sunday is still unknown. There were rumors on Friday that Cam Hayward was ill. He missed Friday's practice with an illness. And according to people like Jerry Dulac, it might be COVID. You know, it could be just speculation, but we don't know yet. So if you're out without TJ Watt, you're without Cam Hayward, you're without Joe Hayden. Devin Bush is being called Devin Bust. So, you know, it doesn't look like Minkah Fitzpatrick is not. He's not his usual All-Pro self this year. You know, we mentioned the line with Cam Hayward in there. Without Cam Hayward, I mean, my gosh, it might as well be the 4th preseason game in terms of the overall talent. So the question is it okay to be excited, as the title of this show suggests? Is it okay to be excited about Ravens week? And at this point, it just doesn't feel like it to me, you know. And that's mainly because of all the problems that the Steelers have, right? Not just performance. And the performance has been discouraging both on offense and even on defense. And it wasn't that long ago that this defense was considered on the cusp of being truly an elite unit. And now, I think they mentioned it last Sunday, wasn't long ago, they were 11th, which, you know, was pretty close to being elite. Now they're, I think, during the game, I think they fell to 23rd, or going into last Sunday's game, they were 23rd. And I think now they're like 21st, whatever it is. They're in the 20s now as far as an overall defense. And that's not anywhere close to being elite. Obviously, they can't stop the run. They're not that great at stopping the pass as of late. And they're, I think, on pace for less than a turnover a game now, or maybe a little over a turnover a game. They're not taking the football away, you know. And I think the real discouraging part for the 2021 Pittsburgh Steelers defense is that they're now not getting after the quarterback at a high rate anymore. TJ Watt still is when he's in there and he's healthy. But everybody else, if you take away TJ Watt's 12.5 sacks, that leaves 11.5 sacks for the rest of the defense. I think they have 24 sacks after 11 games, right? Yeah, 11 games. So that's a pace for 37 if they stayed on this pace, which is well below what they've been doing since 2017. They've averaged over 50 sacks a year, but you know, since the second half of that 2016 season, they've been pretty much the most dominant pass rushing defense in the NFL, probably by far. I mean, they've been the most consistent. It's been the most consistent part of their team overall has been their pass rush, and that's not even really that potent anymore. So when you're talking about the issues they have on defense, and the Ravens coming in here with Lamar Jackson, who obviously probably the greatest running quarterback who's ever lived. You know, he's certainly, he's one of the, when he's on, he's one of the best offensive weapons in the NFL. And he has issues with passing. We know that. He had 4 interceptions last week. And if they weren't playing the Browns, the Ravens might have lost. But Lamar Jackson, when he's on, it's hard to find a more potent offensive weapon in the NFL. Of course, him and the rest of the Ravens rushing attack is pretty darn good. So you have that. And, the way this offense is right now, the Steelers offense, and I thought we were seeing some encouraging signs, especially during the LA game. But, last week they kind of reverted back to what we saw over the first month. Ben looked afraid to hold on to the ball for more than a second. I mean, every pass was either a 5-yard pass or a 50-yard fly pattern. No utilization of the middle of the field. I realized Kevin Dotson wasn't in there, but if having him out causes the offense to sputter the way it did, that to me that doesn't bode well. And I think Dotson wasn't even in there for the LA game, so I don't know what happened last week with that offense, but all the progress it had shown for about a month through that LA game, it just vanished completely last week. So I don't know what to make of this offense. The Ravens have a pretty subpar passing defense. I think they're compromised in their secondary with injury. But, can the Steelers take advantage of it? And right now, I don't think so. So I think that the difference between the 2018 Ravens and the 2021 Steelers, I mentioned a few seconds ago, and that's Lamar Jackson. The Ravens, and they probably didn't know it at the time, they had this wild card, this X factor, this rookie quarterback who they drafted in the first round. They had him waiting in the wings, and they kind of, moved on from Joe Flacco and put him in there really out of desperation. There were rumors that John Harbaugh, who everybody always says is better than Mike Tomlin, there were rumors that he was about to get fired, and, they inserted Lamar Jackson in the lineup, and he completely changed their team, their culture, everything. And it became Lamar Jackson's team. Well, the Steelers really don't have that kind of player on their roster right now. They don't have that X factor, that wild card. They don't have that guy that if you threw him in there right now would change everything. So that's the only difference. So that's why I just don't feel all that confident about this team moving forward. Again, can it change? Can my confidence in them change? Of course it can. All it's going to take is a win or two, and all of a sudden I'm flying high, maybe not flying high, but I'm gaining optimism or confidence about what they can do down the stretch. But if you're looking at things right now, as far as them making the playoffs, I think they're 12th in the AFC. They're the 12th seed right now. Tiebreakers are out the window. They have a tie, so who cares about tiebreakers? But at this point, we discussed this on Monday's show on The Hangover. I think at minimum it's going to take 4 wins for them to really have a decent shot at making the playoffs. 9-7-1. But in order to get there, you're probably going to have to beat the Ravens once. Obviously, beat the Vikings, beat the Browns, and then find a way to beat the Titans and or the Chiefs. I just don't see how that's going to happen. As I'm sitting here right now, obviously that can all change. That's what's so great about sports. As I keep saying, it's the best reality TV show, and there's something to be said for momentum. But nothing we've seen from this team really, dating back to last October of 2020, would suggest that they're on the cusp of going on any kind of a real roll. So on that downer of a note, I will open things up to some questions and comments from the live chat. Let's see what we have tonight. Ryan G., who chimes in again, and he says the Steelers can't give Minkah Fitzpatrick a huge portion of that cap space, the $50 million cap space I mentioned earlier, because he hasn't been the same this year. That's true. But I think, I'm pretty confident that he'll, everybody has a bad year every now and then. And if this is Minkah Fitzpatrick's idea of a bad year, it's really not that bad. I think he's a top shelf free safety. And I think if they can work out a deal for him, they need to do it, because, you need that kind of a dynamic playmaker on your defense if you can work out a deal. So Mark Tobin says of Ben Roethlisberger's decision to come back, Ben had to come back, and he had faith that they would give him a better line and did not see DeCastro and Big Al being cut. Well, he had to see Big Al being cut. He wasn't cut. He was a free agent. I think, he's a smart guy, Ben. He had to know that they weren't going to bring back Al Villanueva, who, by the way, has not exactly been great in Baltimore. So I don't know what having him here would do. I mean, I think at least you have Dan Moore in there, a rookie, 4th round pick, who started every game. I think has he missed any? I don't think he has. He's taking his lumps, but he's learning. As far as DeCastro, Trey Turner is a solid vet. Again, when people say do something with this line, first of all, at the onset of free agency, they didn't have the money to do anything with this line. All they could do was watch guys like Matt Filer leave. But as far as like the first round, I mean, people act like all the top linemen were still there, and they weren't. Najee Harris was probably their best bet as far as the 24th pick. And I think it's hard to argue with Najee Harris as that first round pick, now that what you know about the kind of player he can be. If you're just worried about 2021, okay, maybe they should have went in a different direction. If you're worried about the future, what they had available at 24, I think Najee Harris was their best bet. And of course, it's hard to argue against Pat Freiermuth. And, people talk about the line. They continue to harp on the line, and I get it. It's one of the biggest reasons why the offense has stunk this year. But you have 2 rookies and a second-year guy starting for that line. And I think that bodes well for the future for the line. Will that mean that they're not going to win a Super Bowl this year? Probably. But had they gone out and signed Anthony Munoz in his prime and, had a prime Marquise Pouncey at center, do you think they're winning the Super Bowl this year with 39-year-old Ben and a new offensive coordinator and, a new offensive line coach? You think they're winning the Super Bowl? I mean, there's nothing in there that really – there's nothing about their offense that really was a recipe for success. You knew it was gonna take time, and they were gonna struggle. Maybe we didn't think they would struggle as much as they have, but we kind of knew this was gonna be a rebuilding year, kind of disguised as giving Ben one more shot to win it all. But you can't do both. I'm sorry. I mean, you just can't do both when you're talking about. I guess you can do both. Is what I'm trying to say. You can do both, but it usually results in 9-8 or 9-8 or 8-1 or whatever. And I think that's what we're seeing this year. It would have been nice if Ben was the Ben of old, and he had one last great year in him before riding off into the sunset. But it just wasn't meant to be. But in the meantime, they have all these rookies starting on offense and gaining all this experience this year. They have all these other young players on offense: Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, Kevin Dotson. Who am I missing? Did I say Deontay Johnson? I probably did. They have such a young core on offense and now on defense. I think it was Matt Williamson said the other day that the Steelers have had more rookie snaps this year than any other team except the Jets. So, they're still trying to stay in it, but they're also trying to rebuild on the fly, which has been their modus operandi for the longest time. That's what I was trying to say like 2 minutes ago. I said it wrong. That's what I was trying to say. They brought Ben back. Excuse me. They brought Ben back for one more year. Because they probably didn't want him to go out in front of a bunch of empty stadiums in 2020. And number two, they thought they could maybe go on another run with him on his way out the door. But at the same time, they're also trying to rebuild because they don't want to be one of the, I think they're like the fan base. They can't handle a total collapse of, like a horrible year, like a 3 or 4 win season. I don't think they can handle that. So they're trying to do both. They're trying to rebuild and they're trying to go for it and go on a run. And this is what you have right now. It didn't quite work out, at least up to this point. So there's still 6 weeks to go. Who knows what can happen? But I had no problem with them bringing Ben back for one more year. And I have no problem with how they've addressed the line because they have 2 rookies starting. I mean, they're struggling, but they're starting. They're taking their lumps and they're learning, hopefully. Vince Williams, in his rookie year, he started 11 games as an inside linebacker, and he struggled mightily. So much so that by the end of the year, Troy Polamalu was kind of filling that inside linebacker role. They had nobody else. Larry Foote was hurt in week 1 for the year, and their depth was horrible. Excuse me. It was another year like this year where they had cap issues. So, they had to make some sacrifices. But eventually Vince Williams became a really, really good player for them and one of their leaders on defense. And maybe he doesn't become that kind of player without that valuable experience in his rookie year. So sometimes you have to look at the big picture. Ryan G asks, again, Ryan G's a star of tonight's show. I don't know why they traded a 5th-round pick for Witherspoon. They were trying to address the secondary, the depth of secondary. It wasn't a finished product, even after training camp. You lose to Steven Nelson, or you cut a Steven Nelson, and you lose to Mike Hilton in one off season. I mean, it's hard to replace those guys. And Witherspoon was a former 3rd-round pick, a recent 3rd-round pick, and I think they were trying to bring in a player that they thought they could maybe develop into something more early enough in his career. Kind of like back in 2016 when they traded a future 6th-round pick for Justin Gilbert. It didn't work out, but it was worth a shot. So, I mean, had Witherspoon developed this year or contributed this year, nobody would be worried about that 5th-round pick. So, not every trade's going to work out. I mean, it's one thing to say, make a trade and sign this guy or sign that guy, but for every one that works out, there are probably a few that don't. That's just the life of it. So that's why I laugh when people when they talk in absolutes about the free agent activity or the draft, just because they would have drafted a lineman in the 1st round back in April doesn't mean that player would have been any good in the NFL. But we do know that they have themselves a darn good running back, probably a future Pro Bowl, all-pro running back. So to me, I just don't see why people are still harping on the selection of Najee Harris, other than the fact that they're worried about trying to win this year, which brings me back to the Steelers' philosophy of doing things, rebuilding on the fly while still trying to stay competitive, because they know, I don't think they realize that the fans can't handle a total rebuild all at once. So I have a super chat in here. I see it up in the corner, but I can't find it on here. $4.99. But there it is. Victor Asher, or Victory Asher. That's a new name. And thank you, Victory Asher, for the $4.99. Did I miss it? Here we are. Haskins is the answer if you give him a legitimate shot. He's never had that ever since he was drafted. Mason couldn't beat out a duck. It might be Dwayne Haskins' agent. That's a pretty strong statement. We don't know. We don't know if Dwayne Haskins is the answer. But I thank you for the $4.99 super chat, Victory. That's very generous. I thank you for the donation. But anyway, we don't know if Dwayne Haskins is the answer. But his talent is intriguing. And for all we know, he might have already been promised a shot at starting next year. We don't know that because you remember, if you go back to the summer training camp when he was talking to reporters, he referenced a conversation he had with his bosses in Pittsburgh, Mike Tomlin, whoever, and he didn't really elaborate on what the conversation was, but I wouldn't be surprised if that conversation was, well, we want you to develop in our system for a year, and we're going to give you a legitimate shot at starting in 2022. That could have been the conversation. But he's clearly not going to get the shot this year because Ben is here. If you're bringing back Ben Roethlisberger, then you're not bringing him back so he can sit on the bench behind Mason Rudolph and or Dwayne Haskins. You're bringing him back to see if you can go on one more run with him as your starting quarterback. So as long as Ben is here over the last 6 games, he's not going to be benched. People might as well just put that out of their mind. It's not going to happen unless he gets hurt or they try to make an excuse for and disguise it as an injury and his benching. And I don't see them doing that. Clarence Washington says of Ben, we can't have a 40-year-old quarterback next year. But Ben, this is a young man's sport, going to pull off the Band-Aid. Yeah, well, I think it's going to happen next year. Again, I think they wanted to give it one more shot with Ben to see what would happen. And clearly it hasn't worked. But they're not going to bring him back next year. I don't see any reason. First of all, he's not under contract. Theoretically, he has some voided years, but he's not under contract, number one. Number two, as you said, Clarence, they don't need a 40-year-old quarterback, especially one who's underperforming. If you have such a young team, you might as well just go in a different direction with your court. Maybe it's Dwayne Haskins. Maybe it's a veteran, a younger veteran. People keep talking about Russell Wilson, those kind of players, Teddy Bridgewater, somebody like that. Or maybe you go with a draft pick. But yeah, I don't see Ben coming back next year. I think I was behind them going with Ben one more year this year. But unless he set the world on fire, I was prepared for them to move on from him in 2022. I've been prepared for that since before the season even started. Mark Tobin says of Killer Witherspoon and that trade mentioned earlier. The trade is not the point. The point is why I make a trade when they don't give him a real chance to play. Maybe because he hasn't shown the ability in practice to start or play significantly. Again, not every trade's going to work out. Not every trade's going to. You're not going to win every trade. Sometimes you're going to lose that trade. Sometimes you're going to take a flyer on a guy and you're going to get him in here and find out that, he's not the player we thought he was. And, and also you have to consider who else is on the roster. Obviously they want to develop James Pierre. They like Cam Sutton a lot. Justin Lane plays a pretty big role on special teams, even though people don't realize that. I think he's one of their gunners. So, maybe there's just he's not doing enough in practice. He's not breaking through that glass ceiling in practice. So he's not getting a helmet on Sundays. I mean, it's a 5th round pick. So it's not like they invested all this draft capital in bringing him here. It's a 5th round pick. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. If they brought him in here and he became a great player, then it's worth it. And who knows? Maybe there's time for that next year. Again, it's not just about 2021. It's about, I've heard more than one reporter say that this week. They're everything that's happening right now is really about 2022 and beyond with this team. And they brought Ben back. To keep repeating myself, they brought Ben back one more year to see if he was enough to, along with the defense, to allow them to go on one more playoff run. But in the meantime, they have their eyes. They're looking ahead to 2022 and beyond. And if you look at the roster, the youth, to me, there's a lot to be excited about with this team. They have problems. They have things they have to address, but I like the fact that they have a lot of youth and they're gaining valuable experience right away. The linemen, guys like Trey Norwood, obviously Najee Harris, Pat Fryermuth. There's a lot to like about the future of this team. They just have some things they have to address. And obviously, I'm very excited about Deontay Johnson. And despite his practice statement the other day, I really am excited about Chase Claypool. I think it's sometimes we forget that it takes some players a few years to develop fully. And, I thought after last year that Chase Claypool would be a superstar on par with DK Metcalf as far as somebody who's damn near impossible to stop. But maybe he just needs another year or so to develop. So on that note, I think I will call it a night. I loved interacting with you guys tonight, and I hope you have a great weekend. I hope the Steelers find a way to win on Sunday and beat those Ravens and change my narrative for next week's show. Maybe I'll be singing a different tune because I'll be so optimistic about the 6-5-1 Steelers and what they could do moving forward. We'll see. But in the meantime, I hope everybody has a great weekend. I hope you enjoy Sunday's game. I hope it's a win. And go Steelers.